If you want to join Thanksgiving, come wash the dishes, my daughter-in-law shouted over the phone before hanging up on me. I stood in my kitchen for a long moment, staring at the silent phone in my hand. The pumpkin pie cooling on the counter suddenly seemed less important. Outside my window, the maple trees swayed in the cold November wind. Inside, my house felt quieter than ever. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I'm 71 years old, and until that phone call, I still believed family holidays were about being together. Maybe that sounds foolish. Maybe I should have learned the truth years ago. But some lessons take longer than others. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end of my story, and let me know where you're listening from. Sometimes it helps to know someone out there understands. Thanksgiving had always been my favorite holiday. More than Christmas. More than birthdays. It was the one day that never felt commercial or complicated. Just family, food, laughter, and gratitude. For more than 3 decades, I hosted every Thanksgiving dinner in the same house where I raised my son Ryan. Every year, I woke before sunrise to prepare the turkey. Every year, the dining room filled with voices, stories, and familiar traditions. Even after my husband Walter passed away 4 years earlier, I tried to keep those traditions alive. I thought they mattered. I thought I mattered. Earlier that morning, I had been rolling pie crust in my kitchen when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Emily, my daughter-in-law. I smiled before answering. That was my first mistake. Emily rarely called unless she needed something. "Hi, Emily," I said cheerfully. "I was just finishing a pumpkin pie. Should I bring it tomorrow?" There was a brief silence. Then came her voice. Sharp, irritated, as if I had interrupted her day simply by existing. "If you want to join Thanksgiving, come wash the dishes." I thought I had misheard her. "Excuse me?" I asked quietly. "You heard me," she snapped. "There'll be a lot of people. Someone has to help clean up. If you're coming, don't just sit around." Then she hung up. No goodbye, no laughter to suggest it was a joke. Just silence. I slowly lowered the phone. The pie crust remained unfinished beneath my hands. For several minutes, I stood there looking at the countertop. The flour, the rolling pin, the recipe card stained by decades of use. Small things suddenly carried a strange weight. I wanted to tell myself Emily was stressed, that she didn't mean it, that people sometimes say rude things without thinking. But deep down, I knew better, because this wasn't the first time. It was simply the first time she had said it out loud. Over the years, there had been little moments. Invitations arriving late. Family dinners scheduled without asking if I was available. Photographs posted online where everyone seemed present except me. Tiny cuts. Easy to ignore individually. Harder to ignore when they formed a pattern. Ryan always had an explanation. Emily was busy. Emily was tired. Emily didn't mean it that way. My son had become a translator for behavior that should never have required translation. I looked toward the dining room where my Thanksgiving decorations were already displayed. A small centerpiece sat in the middle of the table. Orange leaves. White candles. A tradition I continued every November. Suddenly it all felt foolish. Not because of the decorations. Not because of the holiday. But because I realized I had spent years trying to preserve a family gathering that existed mostly in my memory. Still, I decided I would go. Not because Emily wanted me there. And certainly not because she wanted help with dishes. I would go because I needed to see something with my own eyes. I needed to stop making excuses. I needed to understand what place, if any, remained for me in my own family. At that moment, I didn't know that Thanksgiving would reveal far more than hurt feelings. I didn't know a simple phone call was about to expose a secret that had been growing quietly inside my family for years. That evening, after the pie had cooled completely, I wrapped it carefully in plastic and placed it inside the refrigerator. The house felt larger than usual. Empty houses have a way of reminding you exactly who is missing. Walter used to sit at the kitchen table while I baked. He would steal small pieces of pie crust when he thought I was not looking. Every Thanksgiving, he made the same joke about quality control. I smiled at the memory, but the smile did not last long. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat beside the window overlooking the backyard. The oak tree Walter planted 20 years earlier stood against the gray November sky. Most of its leaves had already fallen. The grass beneath it was covered in gold and brown. For a while, I simply watched the wind move through the branches. Then my thoughts drifted back to Ryan. There had been a time when he called me every Sunday afternoon without fail. Even after he left for college, he would find time to check in. We talked about work, baseball, weather, neighbors, and sometimes nothing important at all. I never noticed exactly when those calls became less frequent. Life changes slowly. Distance arrives quietly. One missed call becomes two. A weekly conversation becomes monthly. Eventually, silence begins to feel normal. After Ryan married Emily, things changed in ways I could not quite explain. She was always polite in public, always smiling, always saying the right things when other people were around. But there was something underneath the surface. Something cold. Family dinners became shorter. Invitations arrived later. Conversations ended sooner. If I mentioned it, Ryan always defended her. He would say she was overwhelmed. He would say she did not mean anything by it. I wanted to believe him. Mothers often choose hope over evidence. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Sleep had come in fragments. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with an old photo album. The first picture showed Ryan at 8 years old wearing an oversized pilgrim hat he made in school. Walter stood behind him laughing. Another photo showed our dining room packed with relatives. Folding chairs lined the walls because there was never enough seating. Every face looked happy. Every smile looked genuine. I ran my fingers across the plastic sleeves. The people in those photographs felt closer than the family I had now. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed. A message from Ryan appeared on the screen. Looking forward to tomorrow. Emily is hosting a big group this year. Should be fun. I stared at the message for several seconds. No mention of the phone call. No mention of what Emily had said. Either he did not know, or he preferred not to know. I typed 3 different responses before deleting them all. Finally, I sent a simple message. Looking forward to seeing everyone. A few minutes later, he replied with a thumbs-up emoji. That was all. I placed the phone face down on the table. The silence in the room seemed louder than before. Later that afternoon, I drove into town to pick up fresh whipped cream from a local bakery. The owner, Mrs. Jenkins, greeted me warmly. She had known my family for years. We chatted for a few minutes about Thanksgiving preparations. She asked whether Ryan and his family would be visiting. I smiled and said yes. The answer felt strange in my mouth. On the drive home, I passed the small lake near the edge of town. Families were already arriving at nearby cabins for the holiday weekend. Children played near the shoreline while parents unloaded coolers and luggage. Watching them should have made me feel festive. Instead, I felt like someone standing outside a window looking in. By the time I reached home, the sun was beginning to set. Long shadows stretched across the lawn. As I stepped onto my porch, I noticed an email notification on my phone. The sender's name caught my attention immediately. It belonged to a law office that had handled several matters for Walter years ago. I frowned. I had not heard from them in a long time. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Then I opened the message. What I read made my stomach tighten. The attorney was asking if we could meet after Thanksgiving regarding a matter connected to Walter's estate. According to the email, there was information that required my personal review. I stood frozen on the porch, reading the message twice. Then a third time. Something told me this was not a coincidence. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and clear. Frost covered the edges of my lawn, and the air carried that familiar scent of wood smoke drifting from distant fireplaces. I woke before 6, more out of habit than excitement. For years, Thanksgiving had been the busiest day on my calendar. Now I moved through the quiet house alone. I made coffee, fed the birds outside my kitchen window, and tried not to think about the strange email waiting in my inbox. The attorney's message lingered in the back of my mind all morning. Several times I considered calling the office immediately. Several times I stopped myself. Whatever it was could wait one more day. By noon, I packed the pumpkin pie into a carrying case and placed it carefully in my car. The drive to Ryan and Emily's house took about 40 minutes. The closer I got, the tighter my stomach felt. I kept reminding myself that I was imagining things. Families go through difficult periods. Misunderstandings happen. Perhaps the holiday would smooth everything over. Perhaps I would leave feeling foolish for worrying so much. The neighborhood was already crowded when I arrived. Cars lined both sides of the street. Children ran across front yards wearing colorful sweaters while adults carried casserole dishes toward various houses. Ryan and Emily lived in a large 2-story home at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. Walter had helped Ryan with the down payment years ago. Seeing the house always reminded me of how proud Walter had been. I parked along the curb and carried my pie toward the front door. Through the windows, I could already see guests gathered inside. Laughter drifted into the yard. Someone was watching football in the living room. Everything looked warm and welcoming. For a moment, I felt relieved. Then Emily opened the door. She barely looked at me. "You made it," she said. Before I could answer, she stepped aside and pointed toward the hallway. "The kitchen is back there." I stood still for a second. "Hello to you too," I said with a small smile. Emily gave a short laugh that did not reach her eyes. "We are running behind. Everyone is helping today." I walked inside. No one offered to take the pie from my hands. No one greeted me at the door. Most of the guests seemed busy talking among themselves. Ryan was standing near the television, speaking with two neighbors. He glanced in my direction and lifted a hand. Then he turned back to his conversation. Something about that brief gesture hurt more than if he had ignored me completely. In the kitchen, I placed the pie on the counter and looked around. The room was crowded with serving trays, mixing bowls, and half-finished dishes. Near the sink hung a new apron, bright orange, decorative. Across the front, embroidered in large letters, were the words "Kitchen Crew." Beneath the lettering, someone had attached a small name tag. Margaret. I stared at it for several seconds. My fingers tightened around the pie carrier handle. The apron had clearly been prepared ahead of time. This was not a spontaneous request for help. Someone had expected me to spend the day standing beside that sink. A teenage voice interrupted my thoughts. "Grandma." I turned and saw Olivia entering the kitchen. At 17, she looked more like Ryan every year. She followed my gaze toward the apron. The smile disappeared from her face immediately. "You have got to be kidding me," she muttered. I looked at her. She looked back at me. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Then Olivia quietly removed the apron from its hook and folded it over her arm. "Do not put that on," she said. The seriousness in her voice caught me off guard. Then she glanced toward the dining room to make sure nobody was listening. When she looked back at me, I saw something I had not expected. Concern, and perhaps a little guilt. "Grandma," she whispered, "there is something you need to know about what has been going on around here." Olivia's words settled heavily between us. The noise of the party continued beyond the kitchen walls, but suddenly it felt far away. I studied my granddaughter's face. She looked nervous. Not dramatic. Not angry. Just uncomfortable in the way people look when they have been carrying a secret longer than they should. "What do you mean?" I asked quietly. Olivia glanced toward the doorway again before lowering her voice. "Grandma, I have been noticing things for a while." She folded the apron tighter against her arm. At first I thought I was imagining it. Then I realized I was not. I waited. Olivia took a slow breath. "Mom always says you choose not to come to things." I blinked. "What?" She nodded. "Birthdays, school events, family trips. She tells people you are busy or that you are not interested." For a moment, I simply stared at her. Several memories surfaced immediately. The elementary school music recital I learned about after it happened. A summer barbecue I discovered through photographs online. A weekend lake trip nobody mentioned until weeks later. Each event had come with an explanation. Scheduling confusion, miscommunication, last-minute plans. I had accepted those explanations because I wanted peace. Now those memories felt different. Olivia looked down at the floor. "Last year when I invited you to my debate competition, Mom told me you said no." My stomach tightened. I never knew about a debate competition. "I know that now," Olivia said softly. Back then I believed her. The kitchen suddenly felt warmer. The air heavier. Across the room, a timer beeped from the oven. Neither of us moved. "Why are you telling me this today?" I asked. Olivia hesitated. "Because this keeps getting worse." Her eyes drifted toward the dining room. "And because of something I overheard last week." My attention sharpened immediately. "What did you hear?" Olivia swallowed. "Mom was talking to Dad after she thought everyone had gone upstairs." She lowered her voice even further. "They were discussing the lake cabin." The words caught me by surprise. Walter's lake cabin sat nearly 2 hours north of town. It had been in his family for decades. Ryan learned to fish there. We spent countless weekends there together. After Walter passed away, I visited less often, but I never considered selling it. "What about the cabin?" I asked carefully. Olivia shifted uncomfortably. "They were talking about renovations and listing prices." I frowned. "Listing prices?" She nodded. "Mom said if everything went according to plan, they could finally move into the neighborhood she wanted." I stared at her. "The cabin is not theirs to sell. That is exactly why I am telling you." The room seemed to tilt slightly. For several seconds I could hear only the distant laughter from the living room and the hum of the refrigerator. Walter's cabin was one of the Few things I still associated completely with him. Every board, every window, every trail through the woods carried a memory. Ryan knew that better than anyone. Are you sure you heard correctly? I asked. Olivia met my eyes. I am sure. Before I could say another word, footsteps approached. Emily entered the kitchen carrying an empty serving tray. The moment she saw us standing together, her expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. A brief flicker of irritation crossed her face. There you are, she said to Olivia. Guests are arriving in the dining room. Then she looked at me. Margaret, would you mind helping clear plates after dinner? Her tone sounded pleasant, almost sweet. But now I heard something beneath it. Something I had ignored for years. Olivia slowly placed the folded apron into a drawer and closed it. Emily noticed. Neither of them spoke about it. An awkward silence filled the room. Finally, Emily forced a smile and left. Olivia waited until she disappeared before speaking again. Grandma, she whispered, I do not think the cabin is the only thing they have been talking about. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? Olivia looked toward the hallway one more time. Then she said the words that stayed with me for the rest of the afternoon. I think they believe something belongs to them that never actually did. The rest of the afternoon passed in a strange blur. I smiled when people spoke to me. I complimented side dishes. I admired family photographs. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inwardly, everything had. Olivia's warning stayed with me no matter where I stood in the house. Every conversation seemed different now. Every glance carried new meaning. During dinner, I sat near the end of the table while guests filled the room with cheerful conversation. The turkey was carved. Plates were passed around. Laughter rose and fell like waves. Anyone looking from the outside would have seen a perfect holiday gathering. I found myself studying Ryan instead. He looked relaxed, comfortable, confident, more confident than I had seen him in years. Several times Emily leaned toward him and whispered something that made them exchange small smiles. Neither seemed aware that I was watching. At one point, a neighbor sitting across from me mentioned the lake region north of town. Property values have exploded up there, he said. People are paying ridiculous prices for cabins these days. I noticed Ryan glance briefly toward Emily. It lasted less than a second. Most people would never have seen it. I did. Neither of them said anything. The conversation moved on. But that single look settled heavily in my mind. Later, as dessert was served, I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. I needed a moment away from the noise. Family photographs covered one wall. Birthdays, graduations, vacations. Years of memories arranged in matching frames. As I studied them, something else caught my attention. A newer photograph hung near the staircase. Ryan, Emily, Olivia, the family dog, everyone smiling in front of the lake cabin. I stared at it for several seconds. The picture had been taken only a few months earlier. Nobody had mentioned that trip to me. I had not even known they were there. My reflection stared back from the glass covering the frame. Suddenly, I felt tired. Not angry. Not shocked, just tired. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from realizing a pattern has existed far longer than you wanted to believe. The realization arrives quietly. One memory connects to another, then another, until the entire picture becomes impossible to ignore. A voice interrupted my thoughts. Margaret. I turned and found Ryan standing behind me. He smiled casually. Everything okay? For a moment, I considered asking him directly about the cabin. About the missing invitations. About all the years of excuses. Instead, I simply nodded, just stretching my legs. Ryan seemed relieved by the answer. That relief did not escape my notice. Good, he said. Emily worked really hard putting this together. I looked at my son carefully. I am sure she did. He smiled again and returned to the dining room. I remained in the hallway for another minute before following him. When dinner finally ended, guests began gathering coats and saying their goodbyes. I helped carry a few serving bowls into the kitchen despite Olivia's objections. Emily thanked everyone warmly. She hugged neighbors. She praised volunteers. She performed gratitude beautifully. Yet somehow, she never once thanked me for bringing the pie. As I prepared to leave, Olivia walked me to the front door. The cold evening air rushed inside when it opened. Be careful driving home, she said quietly. Then she hesitated. And please do not ignore that email. I looked at her in surprise. How did you know about that? A faint smile appeared on her face. Because Grandpa Walter used to tell me something. She glanced toward the dining room before continuing. He always said paperwork tells the truth long after people stop telling it. My hands tightened around my car keys. Olivia hugged me before stepping back inside. I drove home beneath a dark November sky, replaying her words again and again. When I finally reached my house, the first thing I did was open my laptop. The attorney's email was still waiting. This time, I noticed a detail I had overlooked before. Attached to the message was a scanned document bearing Walter's signature, and beneath his signature was a date. The document had been created only 3 weeks before he passed away. I sat alone at my kitchen table long after midnight. The house was silent except for the ticking clock above the stove. Walter's signature stared back at me from the screen. I had seen that signature thousands of times over the course of our marriage. Christmas cards, tax forms, birthday notes. It was unmistakably his. My hands rested quietly on the table as I opened the attachment. The document itself was not particularly long. Several pages. Legal language. References to trusts and property rights. Most of it meant very little to me at first glance. What caught my attention was a paragraph highlighted by the attorney. I read it once, then again, then a third time. Each reading made my pulse beat a little faster. 3 weeks before his death, Walter had amended part of his estate plan. According to the document, ownership of the lake cabin would remain exclusively under my control unless specific conditions were met. More importantly, no transfer, sale, or refinancing could occur. Without my written approval, I leaned back slowly. If Olivia had overheard Ryan and Emily discussing plans to sell the cabin, then they were talking about something they legally could not do. The realization should have made me angry. Instead, it made me curious. Why would they believe they had that authority? The next morning, I called the attorney's office. The receptionist connected me with a man named Daniel Harper. His voice sounded calm and professional. After confirming my identity, he asked if I would be available the following Tuesday. There are several documents Mr. Whitmore wanted reviewed personally, he explained. He left very specific instructions. I stared out my kitchen window. Did Ryan know about these instructions? There was a brief pause. I think it would be best to discuss everything in person, Mrs. Whitmore. The answer told me more than he probably intended. After the call ended, I spent most of the day thinking about Walter. During the final months of his life, he had become unusually organized. At the time, I assumed he was simply putting affairs in order. Now I began remembering small details I had overlooked. Meetings with attorneys, long conversations behind closed office doors, files he kept locked inside his desk. Once, I had asked whether something was wrong. He smiled and kissed my forehead. I am just making sure you are protected, he told me. At the time, I thought he was talking about life insurance. Perhaps he had meant something else entirely. 2 days later, my phone rang. Ryan's name appeared on the screen. I answered. Hi, Mom. His voice sounded unusually cheerful. I was thinking about the cabin. My attention sharpened immediately. What about it? Emily and I thought it might be a good idea to spend more time up there next summer. Maybe make some improvements. Improvements. An innocent word. Yet something about the timing felt strange. What kind of improvements? I asked. Nothing major, Ryan said quickly. Just updates. Modernizing things a little. I remained silent. Ryan continued talking, filling the silence with explanations. New flooring. Updated fixtures. Fresh paint. The more he spoke, the more I realized he sounded like someone discussing property he already considered his own. Finally, he laughed lightly. You know how Emily is. She likes having a plan. I looked across the room at Walter's photograph resting on the bookshelf. Yes, I said quietly. I think I am beginning to understand that. After we hung up, I sat for several minutes without moving. Ryan had not asked permission. He had not asked what I wanted. He had simply described future plans as though decisions had already been made. That bothered me more than I cared to admit. Later that evening, another message arrived. This time from Olivia. Grandma, I hope you are okay. Also, I overheard another conversation today. I stared at the screen. A second message appeared almost immediately. They are talking about paperwork, and they seem very confident about something. My stomach tightened. I typed a short reply asking if she was safe and not to worry. Then I set the phone down. Outside, darkness settled across the neighborhood. Inside, pieces of a puzzle were slowly moving into place. For the first time, I began to suspect that the lake cabin was only one small part of a much larger plan. The following Tuesday arrived colder than expected. Gray clouds hung low over the city as I drove to Daniel Harper's office. The building itself was modest. Red brick. 3 stories. Nothing impressive from the outside. Yet as I parked and looked at the entrance, I felt strangely nervous. Not because I feared what I might learn, because part of me already suspected the truth would confirm things I had spent years trying not to see. Daniel greeted me personally in the lobby. He appeared to be in his early 50s, neatly dressed and calm. The kind of man who measured his words carefully. After leading me into a conference room, he placed a thick folder on the table between us. My name appeared on the front. Mrs. Whitmore, he began, before we review these documents, there is something important you should understand. Your husband anticipated the possibility of future disputes. I remained silent. Daniel opened the folder. Inside were copies of estate records, trust amendments, correspondence, and handwritten notes. Some pages carried Walter's signature. Others contained instructions addressed specifically to the law firm. Daniel slid one document toward me. This was written approximately 1 month before Mr. Whitmore passed away. I recognized Walter's handwriting immediately. The sight of it tightened my chest. For a moment, it felt as though he was sitting beside me again. The note was brief, direct, entirely in Walter's voice. He wrote that family relationships sometimes changed when property and money became involved. He wrote that protecting loved ones occasionally required planning for situations people hoped would never occur. Then came the sentence that made me stop reading. If Margaret ever feels pressured regarding family assets, review all restricted provisions immediately. I looked up at Daniel. What exactly was he worried about? Daniel folded his hands. Your husband never accused anyone of wrongdoing. However, he requested additional safeguards. He opened another section of the folder. The next hour passed slowly. Piece by piece, Daniel explained the structure Walter had created. The lake cabin remained under my exclusive authority. Several investment accounts required my direct approval before any transfers could occur. Most surprisingly, a family trust containing significant assets included conditions that had never been discussed publicly. Certain benefits could be delayed or restricted if attempts were made to influence or pressure the primary beneficiary. That beneficiary was me. I sat quietly as the information settled in. Does Ryan know any of this? I finally asked. Daniel chose his words carefully. Your son is aware that trusts exist. I do not believe he understands the full structure. I stared at the documents. Suddenly Olivia's warnings made more sense. So did Ryan's confidence. So did Emily's behavior. They seemed convinced that time alone would eventually place everything within their control. But according to these documents, that assumption was dangerously wrong. Before I left, Daniel handed me copies of several records. I recommend keeping these private for now, he said. Observe. Listen. Do not rush. The advice echoed. Something Walter himself might have said. That evening, I returned home carrying the folder. As I entered my kitchen, my phone vibrated. A message from Ryan appeared. Hope your appointment went well today. Emily and I were talking about family plans for next year. We should all sit down soon and discuss the future. I read the message twice. Then I looked at the stack of documents resting on my table. For the first time in years, I noticed something unusual. Ryan was suddenly eager to discuss the future. Not memories. Not family traditions. Not spending time together. The future. I placed the phone aside without responding immediately. Outside, the sun disappeared behind the trees. The room darkened. Walter's folder remained open before me. As I turned another page, a separate handwritten note slipped free and landed on the table. It contained only a single sentence. Yet that sentence changed everything. Trust actions become effective immediately upon any attempt to bypass Margaret's authority. For the next several weeks, I followed Daniel's advice. I observed. I listened. Most importantly, I stopped explaining away things that no longer deserved excuses. Once I began paying attention, patterns appeared everywhere. Ryan called more often than usual. Emily suddenly became warmer. Invitations arrived promptly. Family dinners were proposed. On the surface, it looked like reconciliation. Yet every conversation eventually drifted toward the same subject. Planning. Property. The future. One Sunday afternoon, Ryan invited me to lunch. We met at a small restaurant near the river. During the first half hour, we discussed ordinary things. Weather. Football. Olivia's college applications. Then Ryan cleared his throat and leaned forward. Mom, Emily and I have been thinking a lot about long-term family goals. I stirred my iced tea slowly. Have you? He nodded. We want to make sure everything stays organized for the next generation. There it was again. The same language. The same careful phrasing. I remained quiet. Ryan continued. A lot of families make the mistake of waiting too long to simplify things. Simplify things. Another interesting phrase. What exactly are you suggesting? I asked. Ryan smiled. Nothing urgent. We just think it would be smart to review assets and make sure everything is structured efficiently. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but the destination never changed. By the time lunch ended, I understood something important. Ryan was not asking questions because he cared about my wishes. He was trying to discover what I knew. A few days later, Olivia called me. Her voice sounded tense. Grandma, I heard another argument. I listened carefully. About what? Paperwork, she said. Mom seemed frustrated. She kept saying she thought everything would be easier by now. Easier. The word lingered in my thoughts long after the call ended. Christmas approached quickly. Decorations appeared throughout the neighborhood. Lights covered rooftops. Storefront windows glowed late into the evening. In previous years, I might have focused on shopping lists and family recipes. This year felt different. I was waiting, watching, gathering pieces. Then, 2 weeks before Christmas, Daniel called. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to make you aware of something. My attention sharpened immediately. What happened? A real estate inquiry was submitted regarding the lake cabin. I sat upright. By whom? The request came through an intermediary. Nothing illegal occurred. However, someone was clearly exploring valuation and transfer possibilities. I stared out the window. Snow had begun falling across my backyard. Small white flakes drifted silently through the air. Can they do anything? I asked. Daniel's answer came immediately. No, not without your authority. Relief mixed with something else. Sadness. Because for the first time, suspicion was becoming evidence. The following weekend, Ryan and Emily hosted a holiday gathering. Family members filled the house once again. Music played softly. Children laughed. The smell of cinnamon and baked cookies drifted from the kitchen. I arrived carrying a small gift basket and a calm smile. Daniel's folder remained safely locked at home. I had no intention of revealing anything yet. Halfway through the evening, I noticed Emily speaking with several relatives near the fireplace. As I approached, the conversation stopped abruptly. Everyone smiled. Too quickly, too politely. The silence told me more than the words ever could. Later that night, Olivia found me standing alone on the back patio. Cold winter air surrounded us. Grandma, she whispered, I think something is about to happen. I looked at her carefully. Why? Olivia hesitated. Because Mom and Dad keep acting like they have already won something. I followed her gaze toward the warm light spilling from the house. Through the glass doors, Ryan and Emily stood together, smiling confidently as guests moved around them. For the first time, I realized Olivia was right. They looked like people expecting a future they believed was guaranteed. What they did not know was that Daniel had already scheduled a formal family meeting for early January. And according to Walter's instructions, everyone who expected to benefit from the trust would be invited to attend. The family meeting took place on a cold morning during the first week of January. Snow lined the sidewalks outside Daniel Harper's office, and the sky hung low and gray above the city. I arrived early. Daniel greeted me warmly and escorted me into a large conference room. One by one, the others arrived. Ryan came first, carrying himself with quiet confidence. Emily followed beside him, dressed carefully and smiling politely. Olivia arrived shortly afterward and chose a seat near me. Several extended family members were also present, all curious about why the meeting had been called. For a few minutes, small talk filled the room. Coffee was poured. Coats were removed. People exchanged holiday greetings. Then Daniel entered carrying a thick folder, and the atmosphere changed immediately. He thanked everyone for attending before explaining that Walter's final estate instructions required a formal review. Ryan appeared relaxed. Emily looked interested. Neither seemed concerned. Daniel began with routine information. Trust structures, asset management, long-term protections. Most people listened politely without much reaction. Then he reached the section that mattered. He explained that Walter had established specific safeguards designed to protect certain assets from unauthorized influence, pressure, or attempted transfer. The room became noticeably quieter. Ryan shifted slightly in his chair. Emily's smile faded. Daniel continued calmly. The lake cabin remained exclusively under my authority. No sale, transfer, renovation agreement, valuation process, or financing arrangement could proceed without my direct written approval. Furthermore, any attempt to bypass that authority would immediately activate additional trust protections. Silence settled across the table. Ryan frowned. Emily stared at the documents in front of Daniel. For the first time, neither seemed confident. Daniel then revealed something none of them expected. Records showed that inquiries had already been made regarding potential future transactions involving protected assets. No laws had been broken. No transfers had occurred. However, the trust recognized such actions as attempts to explore authority that did not belong to the parties involved. Walter had anticipated exactly that possibility. Additional restrictions were therefore automatically activated. I watched Ryan's expression carefully. Confusion gave way to realization. Realization gave way to disappointment. Across from him, Emily looked pale and stunned. Daniel's voice remained professional throughout. He was not accusing anyone. He was simply explaining facts. Facts have a way of speaking for themselves. Finally, Ryan turned toward me. Mom, did you know about all of this? The room waited for my answer. I thought about the years of excuses, the missed invitations, the conversations that happened without me, the assumptions made about my future. I thought about the apron waiting in that kitchen on Thanksgiving Day. Then I answered honestly. Not until recently. Ryan lowered his eyes. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The silence felt different from the silences that had filled my life during the previous few years. Those silences had been built on avoidance. This one was built on truth. Eventually, the meeting ended. Family members gathered their belongings and slowly filed toward the door. No arguments occurred. No dramatic scenes unfolded. There was nothing left to debate. Walter's documents were clear. His intentions were clear. Most importantly, my rights were clear. As everyone prepared to leave, Olivia hugged me tightly. Grandpa knew what he was doing, she whispered. I smiled. Yes, I said softly. I think he did. Ryan approached a few moments later. He looked older somehow, less certain. I am sorry, Mom, he said quietly. For the first time in years, I believed he meant it. I nodded, but did not rush to comfort him. Some lessons require time. Some relationships require rebuilding. As I stepped outside into the cold January air, snowflakes drifted gently from the sky. I felt no desire for revenge. I felt no triumph. What I felt was something much simpler. Peace. Thanksgiving had not cost me my family. It had revealed who truly valued me and who had merely expected something from me. In the end, the person who protected my future was not a lawyer, a trust, or a legal document. It was the husband who understood long before I did that respect is the most valuable inheritance a family can leave behind.